Guys, I know we are just now getting around to build videos, but we did breakdowns on every exotic change to each of our classes, which took a while. But today, though, we're going to start pumping out builds that are going to be extremely strong. And considering Grandmaster Nightfalls is literally this week, this is a build you're going to want to have on the ready. First up, let me just say that everything solar this season is spicy, especially for my solar hunters. And I know, we've been really hung up on Celestial Nighthawk, the damage it can do. Even in our solo run for the dungeon, we were putting out some crazy damage with Celestial. However, today we're going to be actually returning to Blade Barrage. Now, this is our main damage dealer and will be the focus of this build. Everything we're going to be doing here is going to supply us as much super energy as possible. We've got Gambler's Dodge for easy melee regeneration, Healing Grenades to keep us alive, as this build does require us to be pretty close and personal to our enemies, Knife Trick because it's a great melee, although technically you can use any melee ability here, but personally guys, I prefer Knife Trick. For our aspects, we have Knock 'em Down. This will make our Blade Barrage super launch more projectiles, and it fully refunds our melee energy when we get throwing knife kills while we are radiant. The second aspect is really just up to you. Gunpowder Gamble is good, as it will give you that easy ignition, while on your mark will give you an extra fragment slot. Now for our fragments, we've chosen Ember of Singeing. This will give us class ability energy when we scorch targets. Now we'll be scorching enemies every time we hit an enemy with Knife Trick, which will pretty much be every second. Now this gives us very low class ability downtime. Ember of Solace gives our radiant and restoration effects increased duration, and we mainly utilize that for the restoration increase. Ember of Torches will be giving us radiant every time we hit our melee. Now Ember of Empyrean will extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects each time we get a solar weapon or solar ability kill. So if you're playing in a group or on a team, you could slot out Ember of Solace for Ember of Benevolence. That way you have more ability regeneration and uptime, as your melee will be providing radiant to nearby allies, which will proc Ember of Benevolence's effects. All right, now let's talk our exotic. Shards of Galanor. This exotic has been around since Forsaken. Now it had its moment in the past. Then it got nerfed, but it's now been changed. And with Season of the Wish, ultimately, this exotic has received some hefty buffs. You see, its perk, Sharp Edges, has always refunded Blade Barrage super energy depending on how many hits and kills you get with the super, up to 50% regeneration. So you use your super, and if you hit or kill enough enemies, you get 50% of your super right back. And this has been the case for this exotic for a long time. But it's Season of the Wish, Bungie made the change where Shards of Galanor will now grant you 2.5 to 5% super energy on throwing knife kills, depending on the enemy that you kill. So if I cast a Blade Barrage and get 50% of it back, roughly 20 throwing knife kills will grant you that other 50% if all those enemies are of the lowest rank, and if we're only getting 2.5% energy from each. But we also have to remember that just getting kills in general gives super energy. So really, you're getting more than that for each throwing knife kill. Then we tack on things like hands-on, which will stack with this, giving us even more super energy on melee kills. Slot 2 of those mods on, and now we're really pumping. Basically, at the end of the day, with this build, with these mods equipped, it takes 6 throwing knife kills to get us 50% of our super back. And that's not even counting picking up orbs. Guys, what this equates to is that you're getting your super every 30 seconds, and potentially less than that. Now, it is dependent on your throwing knife kills. And as we start getting into harder content, that is going to be somewhat of a struggle. But this is where our weapons of choice come into play. Now, usually with our build videos, we have a set in stone exotic weapon and armor piece, and we call it a day. But this time around, because the build focuses so much on using our melee constantly, it felt weird to have an exotic primary weapon. They kind of end up fighting each other here. If you're not using your melee, then you're not utilizing Galanor or this build to its full potential. And if you're not using the exotic primary, like Sunshot, for example, then you're wasting your exotic slot. Now, while using this build with Sunshot, there's always this back and forth. We want to spam melees for that crazy super uptime, but we also wanted to use Sunshot because it's really good and substantially better this season with the seasonal artifact perks. That constant mental battle of what enemies to kill with what hurts this build in our opinion. There's an argument that can be made for an exotic primary like Sunshot, but considering how Sunshot literally nukes everything in the room, it kind of hurts this build, if you know what I'm saying. So for our exotic, we decided that our heavy weapon was the best way to go, as we needed more damage. For me personally, guys, it was Dragon's Breath. We just recently did a deep dive on this exotic, and the catalyst really changes this weapon for the better. It's when you use this exotic, like Anarchy Monkey or Wither Horde at that ×5 buff, that's where you're really getting the most out of Dragon's Breath. You also have things like Argent Ordnance, which is an artifact perk, which substantially buffs our rocket damage. We felt really good using Dragon's Breath in tandem with Shards, as Shards kind of fill that gap between being both an incredible ad clearing exotic with this Blade Barrage super, but also at the same time, a good damage dealing super. But pairing it here with Dragon's Breath felt really good. Now you may be asking yourself, why not just consider an exotic special weapon? Guys, that's because we're using a 1-2 punch shotgun. This does buff the damage of our melees here on Hunter, allowing us to take down those beefier targets with a single knife trick. Now you can use whatever you want. You've got Ragnarhild, which is a kinetic 1-2 punch shotgun. One of my favorite strand shotguns in the game is Swordbreaker. Again, what's so beautiful about those shotguns is that you can get enhanced 1-2 punch. The shotgun that I actually utilized the most for this was Without Remorse. And that's because it's a solar weapon. It's also craftable. But being a solar weapon here, you can lean into those benefits, whether it's through our artifact perks or through our fragment selection here, doing things like extending restoration when you don't land the melee kill and instead land the shotgun kill. Again though, the main priority here is getting those melee kills. Now speaking of artifact perks, we need to go over. We're taking the perk From Whence You Came, which will give your abilities a 5% increase in damage versus taking and scoring enemies, which is pretty much everything this season. We also have Blast Radius to grant us armor charges on rapid kills with rocket launchers, which is great here for Dragon's Breath because I literally just put out one shot and I let it do its work. We have Heart of Flame, which will increase your super damage for each nearby ally and will give those allies radiant when you cast your super. Now this is a very good buff here, guys, to your super damage. We did an entire super damage breakdown of all of our solar supers, and if you are running with the fire team, whether it's in dungeons, raids, or Grandmaster Nightfalls, please use this artifact mod. Now we're also taking Wish into Being. This is a really good artifact perk, as this will spawn orbs of power on ability final blows while your super is nearly fully charged. This is a great way to top off your super. And the beautiful thing is that if you have a good set of Wish armor, this actually will activate earlier, allowing you to breach that gap, reaching that super even faster. Next, we have Revitalizing Blast, which will make Knife Trick weaken champions and bosses. Then in that final column, we have Argent Ordnance for that 15% increase in rocket launcher damage. Now, depending on whether or not you're running solo, you would definitely want to run Solar Operative. But personally, I find this build to stand much stronger in team compositions rather than being a solo play. Now, the only thing that's really using armor charges for this build is Argent Ordnance, and that's all right. Again, we're trying to build up armor charges and not really blow it anywhere else. Again, nothing here in our armor charges buffs our damage for our melees. And yes, we can stack on surges for, say, Dragon's Breath. And I will say, if you've got the survivability, go right ahead. Now, keep in mind, one armor charge isn't consumed until you fire off 2 rockets. So each armor charge gives you 2 buffed rockets, which you can really space out here. Now, lastly, we need to talk about the mods. For our helmet, we have 2 hands-on mods for that increase in super energy from melee kills. You can rock things like Radiant Light or even Powerful Friends just to rebound some of that armor charge for your teammates. Now, in our gloves, I'm actually stacking a few things differently here. I have Impact Induction, which is nice, as causing damage with the powerful melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown. This is a good way to get my healing grenade back. But I also have Heavy Handed, where our powerful melee final blows creates orbs of power. Again, another way here to feed ourselves more orbs and more super energy. For our chest piece, you want to rock some resist mods. You can do a charge up mod if you want to tack on more rocket damage with Argent Ordnance, but again, completely up to you. This changes drastically depending on the content that you're in, and survivability is the priority. In our boots, we have some recuperation mods embedded already, and for our class, I have Powerful Attraction to collect those orbs when I use my class ability, Reaper to guarantee an orb when we get a kill after we dodge, although this is tied directly to your weapon final blows to spawn that orb, and a bomber mod. Now to our gameplay loop. Guys, it's super simple. Essentially though, you chuck down your healing grenade at your feet to give yourself restoration, and then you just go crazy with your melees. Knife Trick kills are going to be generating an insane amount of super energy thanks to Shards of Galanor's buff this season, and when it's stacking with things like hands-on and heavy-handed and a variety of other things, you're going to be pooping out orbs left and right. Now, every time you damage enemies with Knife Trick, you're granted Radiant from Ember of Torches, and every time you get a kill with Knife Trick while Radiant, you get your Knife Trick right back. This allows you to keep this cycle going as long as you get kills with your melee. Now, if you miss your melee or it doesn't do enough damage, you've got Gambler's Dodge, which will give you your melee right back. So there is some forgiveness here. Now, every hit or kill with Knife Trick will feed into your class ability energy thanks to Ember of Singeing, and every Knife Trick kill will keep giving you Radiant, but also extend both Radiant and Restoration's duration because having Empyrean equipped allows that. Now, getting those melee kills is also going to be constantly feeding your grenade energy because of our Impact Induction mod. So again, don't be afraid to use healing grenades. And if you want to slot on more Impact Induction mods instead of heavy-handed, by all means, go right ahead. The goal here is to get Restoration procced and then just keep it up every time you score melee kills. Now, one thing I will say about this build, guys. Don't save your super. The purpose of Shards of Galanor and Blade Barrage is so that you blow your load the moment you can. Just hitting enough enemies will get you 50% of your super back. It'll be buffed by your teammates thanks to Heart of Flame, and it's got more projectiles from knock them down. And you'll be amazed how quickly you get your super back. When you start spamming your ability after using your super, everything, including wished into being, all these things will top off your super extremely fast. You're literally watching this right now in real time, how quickly you get a super back. Now, there were a few times where enemies were closing in on me, and I felt like Knife Trick was just not clearing them out fast enough. Don't forget, guys, a 1-2 punch shotgun with Knife Trick will put down heavy targets very fast. So that's it, guys. That is the build. There's a lot of synergy happening here, and you can imagine how nasty things can get if you and your teammates are feeding orbs back into each other. It's just constant super uptime over and over. I don't think I've ever seen this many Blade Barrages since Forsaken, and that was because back then Shards was busted. But for my hunters here in Season of the Wish, y'all are eating good. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.